Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
It is one of the sacred relics Brother Maynard carries with him. Brother Maynard! 1, 2, 3!
And it's Brother Maynard here to welcome you to another episode of The Skeptic Zone with your host, Richard Saunders. Hang on a minute, that doesn't sound quite right. We need, with Richard Saunders.
Hello, Maynard. I'm visiting Maynard's international studios to do the introduction to the Skeptic Zone, and I was with Maynard last night for a Maynard movie spectacular. That was great fun.
That's right. It was the last of our screening series we've had in Newcastle called Maynardarama, and it was Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. I don't think there's any skeptical angle whatsoever.
There are many angles, but no skeptical angles. But I love being at Maynard's studios to do the introduction to the show and a bit of recording we've been doing other than that. It's fantastic. We're in the William Shatner room, I'm pleased to say.
And on this show...
Oh, boy, why do I come here to do the show? Okay, on this show, it's the show number 403 for the 9th of... I don't even know what month it is. 9th of July 2016. What happens when you're with Maynard. Coming up on this week's show, we're going to be talking about Noah's Ark, or the replica of it in Kentucky. We're going to be interviewing an old friend of the Skeptic Zone, Dr Eugenie Scott, who certainly knows about creationism and evolution and all that sort of stuff. So, yes, they've built a full-scale replica of Noah's Ark in Kentucky, Maynard, complete with cages of dinosaurs.
And it's been built by Amish people as well. I believe it was explained that they were the ones that had the great woodworking skills to do it, and they've done it. I just hope it doesn't rain a lot, although I guess if it does rain a lot, it'll come in handy.
That's the place to be if it rains a lot. Also, coming up on this week's show, Shelley Stocken, who a couple of weeks ago did a report on naturopaths. She's going to be talking about Freeman on the land, Maynard.
Now, this is where, if you say the right thing to a police officer or you find yourself in a legal situation, you can declare yourself not a corporate entity and avoid prosecution and perhaps even taxes. That's
their thinking. So when the police come calling for various fines or whatever, they just protest and they say they're free and they don't have to obey the law. It's really, really quite silly.
Look, I once did a story with a gentleman in Perth who has a car impounded for import tax, and he has actually been sending invoices to the government for impounding his car and saying that they actually owe him money, which is an interesting way of looking at it. And he said he's gone back to the 80s when Australia was incorporated as a corporation and stopped becoming a sovereign nation, that sort of thing. And it's a bit hard to follow, but I'll be interested to see what she does with that, because it is a bit hard to unravel the levels of it. And there have been people that have claimed to be successful in this, but then there are people that say that they're making that up. So I'd like to know where the truth is.
Me too. We'll find out with Shelley. And folks, if you want to read what Shelley has to say, I'll put a link to her item in the show notes because she's been published at the Telegraph, I think. Good for her. And, of course, we have a really interesting segment coming up with you, Maynard, a bit later on, where we're going to be discussing some of your favourite podcasts.
Yeah, podcasts I listen to on a weekly basis, and the ones we're going to be looking at this week are the Zen Thinking podcast and the Higher Side Chats.
You're always telling me about these podcasts, and I haven't listened yet, but I might have to this time around. So that's all coming up on this week's show, Maynard. But what a pleasure it is to be in Maynard's studios. I should come up here more often to do the show, I think.
That's right. You can meet my rubber chicken.
I met your rubber chicken before.
And, of course, if people have time to get over to maynard.com.au, what's coming up next week is an interview with Kim Wilde. Kim Wilde is about to tour Australia. Again, nothing sceptical about that, except you could be saying, what's she coming out for? Well, she's coming out to sing, and she's coming out with Howard Jones, and Dr. Rachie is a huge Howard Jones fan.
That's right. You, in fact, it was only the other night you interviewed Kim Wilde, because I've heard little clips from it.
Yeah. I spoke to her, and she's very excited about the tour. So we've got Kim Wilde and Howard Jones coming out fairly shortly, and I'm going around Australia with Lamal and Terry Nunn from Berlin and Martika and Paula Karkas, who did Boom, 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 Let's Come Back to My Room, and Men Without Hats. And so that's what I'm up to.
So if people go to maynard.com.au around Australia, they can maybe catch up with you.
Yep, they can catch up, and they can also get some of those interviews that are all up there already. And like I say, nothing skeptical, all completely unskeptical, because I just talk to anyone about anything at any time, because frankly, I'm a lonely, sad man.
That's very true. I'm not skeptical about that. That means the show must start.
That's right. Okay, Richard, it's over to you. By the way, a lot of people are saying, the cats. What about the skeptical cats? Hen and Maud, how are they going? When do they stop being kittens and become cats?
Soon, I hope, because they're growing like crazy. They must have doubled in size since we got them. It's amazing.
Check out their videos on the Skeptic Zone. And also, if you're a listener to the Skeptic Zone, you may be listening on YouTube, because many of the shows are now available there.
In fact, as we speak over the last couple of days and the next few days, I'll be putting up the entire back catalogue of the Skeptic Zone on YouTube, which is really good. If you just go to YouTube and look for the Skeptic Zone podcast, you'll find all those. And I've discovered that it's a really nice way to index the episode, because we can now link exactly to any particular interview going back 8 years.
For example?
For example, you can listen to all of Eugenie Scott's going back for 8 years or whatever, or all your segments.
Oh, you wouldn't want that.
You wouldn't want that.
No.
But many other good things.
That's true. There is some good stuff there. So I'll let you introduce this episode 403, and we'll get right into it.
Well, this is episode number 403. Thank you to all the new listeners who are listening over the last few weeks. We've got a lot of new listeners. Very happy to have you with us. And as I normally do at the top of the show, Maynard, why don't you and I walk next door to your kitchen and have some of those chips from last night with the chicken salt. Joining me now all the way from Berkeley in California, Dr Eugenie Scott. Hello, Jeannie.
Hello, Richard.
So nice to catch up with you again. I don't think we've actually seen each other since the Australian Skeptics Convention in Brisbane last year.
No, unfortunately. I either have to get over there or you guys have to get over here. It's been too long.
Yeah, it's a bit of a problem, because as I've discovered, like looking at Atlas and Globe and Google Earth and all these things, I discovered there's a huge ocean somehow between Australia and the United States, which is quite a coincidence, really, because we're going to be talking about a huge ocean today and a rather huge boat, because it's just come to my attention that today, the day we're recording this interview, the 7th of July, Ark Park in Kentucky has opened. What can you tell us about that?
Is it okay if every time I mention Ken Ham of Answers in Genesis, I describe him as the Australian Ken Ham? The Australian Ken...
If you want to.
Actually, that's just a tease, because it's still all our fault. If Dwayne Gish and Henry Morris and the other folks from the Institute for Creation Research hadn't invaded Australia in the 1960s and 70s, probably Ken Ham would not be the person he is today. But the person he is today, the Australian Ken Ham, is a very successful entrepreneur who has established an institution called Answers in Genesis in northern Kentucky, where previously he built a creation museum. And those of us on our side of this issue will generally describe that as, you heard the quotation marks around museum, right?
Right.
And now, as you pointed out, today is the opening day of his latest vacation destination, the Ark Encounter, known more informally as the Ark Park, because it rhymes better. Yeah, the Ark Encounter is the newest of the vacation sites that Ken Ham and Answers in Genesis have. And they've just opened the first component of it, which is a life-size replica of Noah's Ark. And they plan to have quite a few other attractions in the 800-acre site that they have up there in northern Kentucky to make northern Kentucky a real creationist destination. You could come and spend your first day at the Creation Museum and then your second day at the Ark Encounter and have yourself a wonderful time.
Well, just as we're chatting now, I'm looking at the website, answersingenesis.org, and there's a big picture there, I presumably taken in the last few hours of the opening, and there are hundreds and hundreds of people there lined up and gathered around this colossal, absolutely colossal replica of what they think, well, some people think Noah's Ark, the magical boat, was like. There's another picture I've noticed where they have 3 space shuttles in a row as comparison, and the Ark is bigger than if you put 3 space shuttles head to toe in a row. And this thing, it's just hard to get your head around the scale of it. I mean, it is a huge effort no matter how you look at it.
Oh, yeah, this is a mammoth undertaking. There's no question about that. Ken Ham hired several hundred Amish carpenters who are very good at working with wood, of course, and he had other carpenters working as well, of course. And they worked for months, obviously, on this very, very large structure. It's not made of gopher wood. Nobody knows what gopher wood is, but this is made out of wood nonetheless. The good news is that it's very far from any large body of water, so they don't have to worry about whether or not it's seaworthy.
Right. Because
the prospects of it being seaworthy are very low, but it's never going to have to float, so I think they'll be fine.
I would say, looking at it, the prospects of it being seaworthy are 0. But that's interesting. I didn't know about the Amish people. I think, though, it would be fair to say that many of the people, if not all the people who worked on it, had a fire in their hearts and thought they were really doing something incredible to promote their religion or God or something like this.
Yes, I mean, to give Ken Ham credit, he is very upfront about the mission of Answers in Genesis. I mean, he, unlike the Institute for Creation Research, which tries to present itself as an essentially scientific organization, Answers in Genesis has from day one been a Christian-oriented ministry, full stop. It uses science to bring people to Jesus in their view, but it's not primarily about the science at all. It's really about the Christian mission and saving souls. And, in the United States, we feel very strongly about freedom of religion and freedom of speech, and, that's fine. If Ken Ham wants to spend $100 million building a replica of the Ark to save souls, well, bless his heart, go for it. That's your freedom of religion in the United States. There's been quite a controversy over the last couple of years, really, because as many attractions and businesses in the United States will do, Answers in Genesis applied for a tax rebate from the state of Kentucky, many times as a way of encouraging businesses and encouraging the hiring of citizens and so forth. States will offer tax rebates to institutions that promise to hire people and build things in the state. And this is not an uncommon activity. When Answers in Genesis applied, however, this did raise some eyebrows, because what would be happening is when the Ark opens, which is now, for a period of time, the Ark would not have to return sales taxes to the state of Kentucky, which, if it's as big a success as Ken Ham thinks it's going to be, is going to be a substantial amount of money. Now, like I say, this is commonly done for businesses. This is not an unusual activity. What's unusual is that this break was being given to a straight-up religious organization, which runs afoul of another consideration in the United States Constitution, which is that there is this hands-off relationship between religion and the state. The First Amendment calls for neutrality between governmental institutions and religious institutions. And many people believed that for the state to give a tax rebate to Answers in Genesis for the Ark Park was was support of a sectarian religious view, and there was a lot of objection to this. Unfortunately, a federal district court judge last year ruled that this was in fact legal, and the state of Kentucky did not appeal the case, although I think they could very well have won on appeal, but not that I'm a lawyer, but these kinds of things generally don't fare terribly well. However, there was a new administration that came into the state of the governor's office in Kentucky, and they did not want to pursue an appeal when they lost the case, so there is not going to be an appeal. So that's been the major controversy in terms of the United States, that a lot of people don't really think that the state should be subsidizing religion in this fashion.
Well, that's an interesting angle on it, and you've got to wonder of the mindset of some of the people involved in the lawmaking decisions, how swayed one way or the other. There are economic considerations too, but maybe if you think that you're doing something right for God in the end anyway, that sort of overrules a lot of other considerations. But just getting back to the structure itself, which again, just looking at photographs of it, it's just mind-boggling. On the website, they say that the ark itself is, well, the replica, that is, it's a 510 feet in length, and it's the largest freestanding timber-framed structure in the world. Now, that's just mind-snapping, but I suppose what's even more mind-snapping is once inside, and actually I'd be very curious to see it for myself. Apparently you can see sections of it which are what you might have expected to see on the real ark, including the pens with dinosaurs.
Yes, indeed. According to the creation science proponents, God commanded Noah to take male and female of everything that has within it the breath of life. So that's basically all land animals. They didn't have to take fish, although, of course, if the flood was as violent as everybody says it was, any sort of ocean creatures would have been wiped out, but let's not go there. At any rate, the directive, according to the creation science proponents, was to take all male and female of all land creatures. And in one part of the ark of the Bible, it says that that Noah is supposed to take 7 pairs of every clean kind of animal and 5 pairs of every unclean kind of animal. And people have pointed out that, well, obviously dinosaurs and mammoths and other extinct animals had to have been on the ark because they were all created at the same time as Adam and Eve were created, and so they would have been wandering about when Noah had to collect the animals. And if you have, whether a sauropod is a clean or an unclean kind of animals, 5 of them or 7, 5 pairs or 7 pairs is really going to fill up your hole in a hurry. So there's all sorts of wonderful ways that the creation science proponents have for dealing with the space issues on the ark. It's really quite marvelous. They got around the size of the dinosaur problem. I knew you were going to ask, Richard.
Oh, yes.
By claiming that the Noah and his family only had to take juvenile or small sauropods and tyrannosauruses and all the rest.
The photographs, indeed, which are coming through on the various websites for the news outlets now, because this story is creating interest. I'm looking at a wonderful picture of a couple of little baby sauropod dinosaurs in their wooden cage with children looking through in wonder.
Yeah, I'm not at all surprised.
So, Jeannie, are you curious enough to visit the Ark yourself?
Well, I'll probably visit it at some point or another, just as a matter of, professional interest.
Yes.
After all. I mean, this is studying the creationists has been a fascination of mine for close to 40 years now. So clearly I got to check this out. And I suspect Ken Ham would be delighted if I showed up sometime. So there you go.
You'll have to go in disguise. You have to.
Oh no, that doesn't work. I tried that once, actually.
Oh,
yeah.
really?
The first time I went to the second time. The first time I went to the Ark Park, I was actually interviewing Ken Ham for the BBC. And this was just before it opened, and I wasn't able to get a full tour, but I got to see some of it. And then several months later, I was at a paleontology conference in the city of Cincinnati, which is not very far from the Creation Museum. And the organizers of the paleontology convention up there had set up a field trip for anybody who was interested in going to the Creation Museum. And of course, they just got scores of, paleontologists, who just were dying to see this, because it's, from the standpoint of a professional paleontologist, you got to admit this is pretty zany.
Yeah.
So the bus showed up and everybody piled off, and I was kind of skulking around the edges because I was sort of hoping to go in incognito. But it didn't work. I mean, Ham's Creation Museum has video cameras every place, the safety cameras. And somebody must have spotted me because after I'd been there for about 20 minutes or so, 2 or 3 employees of the Creation Museum, people that I knew from my relationship with them, came to, Jeannie, it's so good to see you. We're so glad. How lovely of you to come. And, well, so much for going incognito. But, creationists are very gracious. I mean, I keep telling people that creationists are not bomb throwers. They're really very nice people. Their major concern is that you get saved, and they pray for you all the time, and, can't hurt, might help. But, probably not, but whatever. I can't begrudge them that. But they're all, they're genuinely interested in my well-being. So we had a nice, pleasant chat, and then I turned down the opportunity to have them guide me through the museum, since I really wanted to go through myself and take my own pictures, and I had fun. So yeah, I probably will go to the art park at some point.
Well, please keep me informed. If I can get our local ARC over the Pacific, I certainly would love to join you on a tour of
actually, now that thank you for reminding me. I'm going to be getting an honorary degree in 2017 from a Kentucky university. And now that you remind me, I'll just work in a couple of extra days on my stay and make sure that I go up to get a tour of the art park.
That sounds like a very good idea, but please keep me secretly informed when that might happen. And if at all possible, I think it would be the highlight of my skeptical career to tour Noah's Ark with Eugenie Scott. I couldn't imagine.
Maybe we'll have to figure out some sort of a technological fix so that even if you can't be there with me, I can bring a camera of some sort and patch you in.
That's it.
We'll have to get some of our technology whizzes together to figure that out for us.
That sounds like
so you can ask questions and I can guide you through.
That sounds like the deal. That sounds great. Well, Jeannie, wonderful to catch up with you. I do look forward to hopefully one day swimming over and joining you for a tour of Noah's Ark, and maybe we can both be amazed, and we'll probably both change our minds, I think, once we see it.
Well, it's hard to argue with the a full-scale replica. I mean, who would doubt now that we can see it?
Who would doubt, indeed?
Doesn't look terribly seaworthy, to tell you the truth, but what do I know?
But for now, Eugenie Scott, thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard.
Dr. Harriet Hall, MD, known to thousands as the Skepdoc, a retired family physician and former Air Force flight surgeon. She writes about medicine, so-called complementary and alternative medicine, science, quackery, and critical thinking. Harriet now has a free course, a series of 10 video lectures on science-based medicine and alternative medicine. The videos and an accompanying course guide can be found by following the link at skepdoc.info or by visiting web.randy.org/educational-modules.html. Topics covered in the series are science-based medicine versus evidence-based medicine, what is CAM, chiropractic, acupuncture, homeopathy, naturopathy and herbal medicine, energy medicine, miscellaneous alternatives, pitfalls in research, and science-based medicine in the media and politics. Harriet covers each topic in a matter-of-fact, no-nonsense way that's sure to educate and entertain. Skepdoc.info.
Hello, this is Shelley Stocken, and today I'm going to talk about Freeman on the land.
Hey, Damo, your driver's licence there?
Yeah, I do.
I'll get you to say your full name.
Corporations have names. I don't.
Well, there's a name on your licence, so what's the one on that?
That's a corporate entity.
All right, so how would you like me to refer to you?
As a polite human.
That's what I'm doing, so that's why I've asked you nicely just for your name. No, it's under the road rules, so I'm allowed to issue an infringement notice.
These are public highways, though.
They are, and that's why I'm allowed to. You're driving a motor vehicle on that highway, and you were using your mobile phone, which is an offence under the road rules.
If you do carry out this fraud, under maritime law, 1912, Fall of Tarsus will be visible under habeas corpus, and you will owe me. You will be in debt to $3 billion or 3 pots of gold.
That was taken from Channel 7's Highway Patrol program, in which police pull over a man for using his phone while driving, and the man provides a very unusual response. At least, it's an unusual response if you're unfamiliar with the Freeman on the land movement. How can I describe the Freeman on the land movement? Let me start by asking you a question. Have you ever wanted to be two people? One version of you could be the sensible, law-abiding one. The one that works hard, pays tax and takes responsibility for your actions. The other version of you could be free to run naked around the countryside, thumbing your nose at convention, making your own laws and having a great time, uninhibited by the constraints of organised society. It sounds like a fantasy, but if you're a Freeman on the land, it's real. The Freeman on the land movement, otherwise known as FOTL or simply FOOTL, has been around for a decade or so and stems from similar pseudo-legal movements that aim to avoid paying tax or obeying the laws of a particular jurisdiction. It's not the first movement of disaffected angry people to try and avoid the powers of the state, but it is my favourite, and it is arguably the most ridiculous. But that's my opinion. Let's take a look at what the FOOTL movement is, what Freeman believe, and how their beliefs have been applied in the English-speaking countries where the movement seeks to thrive. My first FOOTL fact: the government is a corporation. Freeman believe that, because governments undertake financial transactions and have credit ratings, they are therefore corporations. My second FOOTL fact: laws aren't laws without a contract. So, because the government is a corporation, Freeman believe that it doesn't have the power or right to govern people or make laws unless it has a contract with each person. In other words, you have to agree to a law, a tax or a fine in a contract before that law, tax or fine applies to you. So you're fine because you never made a contract with the government, right? Wrong. That brings us to my third FOOTL fact. Your birth certificate is a contract. When a person's birth is registered, that person is automatically bound to the government contractually, or so Freeman believe. A birth certificate is a document of ownership, signifying the named party's enslavement to the corporation. It looks like a nicely laid out record of your entry into the world, but it is in fact a contract that says you are now an employee of the government corporation and have agreed to abide by its laws. But don't lose hope. My fourth FOOTL fact: you can get out of your contract. Freeman propose a method for breaking the shackles of your corporate enslavement. In short, you write a letter to important people and tell them to get stuffed. The letter is known as a Notice of Understanding and Claim of Right. Its function is to declare your freedom and explain your own version of the law. There are many examples of these letters online, with variations tailored to the particular Freeman writing it. Usually the letters include a list of understandings. For example, "It is my understanding that the Commonwealth of Australia is a common law jurisdiction where the people have sovereignty." Or, "It is my understanding that all law hangs on loving God and loving one's neighbour as oneself." Or, "It is my understanding corporations are legal fictions." These so-called understandings can sound pretty convincing if you ignore the fact that they're highly subjective assumptions with only a tenuous link to legal reality. Once the Freeman's understandings are laid out, the letter goes on to claim a series of rights based on those understandings that the Freeman is entitled to. Some of the examples that I've found online include the right to drive anywhere you want in an unregistered vehicle without a driver's licence, the right to charge hourly fees for being questioned, detained, transported or incarcerated by police or other authorities, and the right to copyright your own name and charge fees for unauthorised use. Once you've sent this letter to the Queen, the Prime Minister and the police, published it somewhere and carry it around with you, you're officially free. This brings us back to the little fantasy we had going earlier and to my fifth futile fact. There are two versions of you. Congratulations, you are two separate entities. The first is your enslaved legal person who now exists only in writing. The writing on your birth certificate, on your electricity bill and your driver's licence. The second entity is the real you, the actual flesh and blood person who eats and sleeps and listens to podcasts. The one I like to call the meat person. This is the one at liberty to roam wild and free across the wide expanse of nature and probably through a few red lights. My sixth futile fact is, your name is not your name. Now that you are two people, it's important to differentiate between your legal person and your meat person. Your legal person is usually expressed in the traditional way. Richard Saunders, for example. This is the you that exists on official documents, usually in capital letters. So, for the purpose of a podcast, Richard Saunders! Freeman distinguished their meat person from their legal person by expressing their name as first name of the family, last name. For example, Richard of the family Saunders, as opposed to Richard Saunders! My final futile fact is this. Some laws are okay. Freeman might be misguided fringe dwellers with legally interesting delusions, but they're not completely devoid of standards. Most follow what they call common law, which basically states that you can do anything you want as long as you don't cause harm or loss to anyone, and you try to be honest. So I guess driving blindfolded is okay as long as you don't hit anything. So that's a very brief summary of what Freeman on the Land movement is all about. I guess the only question left to answer is, does it work? Well, let's take a quick look at some successful Freeman on the Land cases. And we're done. There are no successful Freeman on the Land cases. The whole movement is based on outdated pseudo-legal concepts and good old-fashioned wrongness. The best a Freeman can hope for is a judge throwing out their fallacy-filled case out of frustration. In reality, many Freemen have turned a minor offence into a jail sentence simply by refusing to engage in the legal process. In my opinion, the best thing the Freeman on the Land movement has going for it is its entertainment value. If you can find the time to look up some Freeman videos on YouTube, I highly recommend it. You've been listening to Shelley of the family Stocken.
Told me that aliens really exist. You met them and swooned.
Sziasztok!
Всем привет!
Hejsan allihop! Guys, I just had the most amazing experience.
What experience, Andras?
Andras, have you been to the pub? I told you not to hang out with Marsh. You know he was blessed by Peter Popov.
No, Yelena, I'm not talking about psychics. It was a real ESP experience.
You have been to the pub. Either that or you've been smoking something.
No, Pontus. The ESP is the European Skeptics podcast. It's the most amazing thing. You get to know so much about skeptics and their activities across Europe. You know, events, hot topics, and interviews with lots of interesting people.
Oh, wow, cool. By the way, Pontus, you just committed the false dichotomy fallacy.
I guess that means I'm really wrong.
Yep. And you can even learn about those fallacies on the show and hear about people spreading silly ideas. You should really check it out. It's the ESP, the European Skeptics Podcast. It's on every week.
All right, so where can I get this ESP experience? It sounds good.
You can go online at theesp.eu, follow it on Twitter at espodcast_EU, or like the podcast on Facebook. Oh, and you can also contact the show by sending them an email to info@theesp.eu. And if you want to subscribe, do a quick search for the European Skeptic Podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, or Stitcher.
I don't know how you can believe.
Here's Maynard's spooky action at a distance.
Welcome to Maynard's spooky action at not such a distance. In fact, we're coming to you live from Maynard International Studios, where we are in the Shatner Room with my special guest, Richard Saunders.
Hello, Maynard. It's great to be here in your international studios, in your own place, in the Shatner Room. And as I look around the studio here, I see wonderful pictures of the man himself with dancing girls. The Shatman with on the set of Star Trek there. Yeah. It's quite a room, and you've got other homages to pop
That's right.
culture.
And listeners at home, Richard did not recognise that William Shatner was sitting next to Gemma Jameson, and I'll let you work that one out. Oh, and of course, Maynard International Studios is a massive complex where all the Maynard archives are, and we do some of our editing and that kind of stuff.
We are surrounded by archives, literally.
Let me tell you, look, I'll just reach over to the right here, and we can find the Raging 80 CD, which contains, Spandau Ballet, The Human League, and China Crisis. There's one you haven't heard for a while that hasn't been on a political show. And look, what we're here today is people are always coming up to me, aren't they, Richard?
Always.
Yeah.
For one reason or another.
Usually because I owe them money. Yeah. But I thought, let's get into the way of thinking. Let's go into the way of Maynard. Because you're going, well, Maynard, what do you listen to as a podcast? Well, I listen to, obviously, a lot of ones that you out there would listen to. Of course, I love the Geologic podcast. I love the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. I like Atheistically Speaking. I like the Atheist Experience. I like the Skepticrat. They're just a few of the podcasts I listen to. But I like to listen to all sorts of things. I like to be challenged. In fact, I'm often going to Richard, you should listen to this. And he goes, I'm bloody well not. And that's about as much as he swears, ladies and gentlemen. He says, bloody well not. Because I go, this is a great thing on this podcast. And you go, no.
Well, you're doing a lot of long travel quite frequently in your car or on the train, so you get a chance to listen to many, many podcasts. But I'm always interested to know, what does Maynard listen to?
So I thought we might, in an ongoing semi-occasional series for no apparent reason, let's just see what's Maynard listening to. Well, here's one. I thought I'd get you off gently here. Now, this is one that I would recommend for people who want to have a bit of a relax or something like that. But I would say a lot of skeptics would go, pooey. Which you shouldn't do that off the bat. You should check things out. It's the Zen Thinking Podcast. The host of the Zen Thinking Podcast is a guy who has, I had a bit of a foot in rock and roll there for a while, and he got into the Zen Thinking Podcast a while ago. Brian Thompson, not to be confused with the Brian Thompson who used to be with the Skeptic movement. And there's a couple of Brian Thompsons, aren't there?
Well, there's a couple of Richard Saunders. I wonder if there are a couple of Maynards. That would be a worry.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's the one that's in Tool. And the way you work that out is that he is in Tool, I am a tool. That's the way you work that out. And he makes wine, I drink wine. That's the way you work out the difference between us all.
It all makes sense. So what's this podcast about?
Well, Brian Thompson, look, he explains it quite well here. Brian Thompson, he explains that I am a Zen vegan poet living on a mountain by the sea, writing about our common state of being, non-duality and infinity. Our common state of being, non-duality and infinity. Now, I don't quite understand the concept of non-duality. I thought it was directly involved with something neurological, as our friends on the
Skeptic's Guide
explained, but it's more of a philosophical thing. Yes, non-dual consciousness, and I don't really understand that, but his poetry is quite easy to understand, and he reads it during the show. But before we get to that, let's have a little bit of a listen to Brian, and I've got to say it's very relaxing. I know a lot of the skeptics won't be into this, but let's just get into the chi of the Zen, or however they describe it. Let's have a bit of a listen to Brian. And this is from episode 53 of the Zen Thinking podcast, titled Using Self-Inquiry to Quiet the Mind, or as I like to say, using self-inquiry to quiet the mind.
Welcome back to another episode of the Zen Thinking Podcast. This is episode number 53, and I'm your host, Brian Thompson, from zenthinking.net. How are you? Thanks so much for swinging by and pressing play once again. I incredibly appreciate you taking the time to entertain these thoughts and ideas and vibes that I'm sharing with you. And it's really cool that you're back for another listen. So let's see where this one takes us today, shall we? What I do here is I read all of the recent works that I've published on my website, zenthinking.net, and then I discuss them a little further if I feel that there needs to be further explanations. So with that being said, let's just get right into it.
So as you can hear, Brian has a beautiful voice, a very relaxing tone, and he reads his poetry and discusses it.
Sorry, hello? What? I just drifted off there for a moment, Maynard.
Look, for example, and look, I hope with respect to Brian, I will read some of his poetry now. Taste an orange, forgetting its name. Do not reason with the unreasonable. Your judgments of others are always your own self-reflection. The mind infers whatever the ego prefers. Decisions are the mind's own invention. Decisions are the mind's own invention. That which perceives never comes and goes. Learning to not indulge the egotic mind. Well, Richard, what do you think of that?
Maynard, what does it mean?
Well, Brian probably explains that, so I can see where the podcast would come in handy, because frankly, my tiny ape brain can't get around that. I apologise, Brian.
It's beyond us.
I do like it. I mean, it is lovely, and look, and there's some very good ideas in that. In each line, taste an orange, forgetting its name. That's actually quite deep. I mean, that is 6 words and a comma. So taste an orange. Like, you don't need to know that that's called an orange to enjoy the experience of having an orange, do you, Richard? You don't have the name of it is irrelevant. It could be called a purple.
It's irrelevant to me because I don't enjoy eating oranges.
Oh, that's right. You've got an allergy to citrus fruit.
Well, not quite, but I don't enjoy them. No.
Yeah, he discovers the Zen of irritable bowel syndrome, don't you? Yeah. So, okay, not a good example. But yeah, see, that's an example. And see, even that on its own, okay, you might not agree with the Zen way of thinking or that sort of discussion, or you might not agree with non-duality or whatever, but I think we can all get the concept that an orange doesn't have to be called an orange to taste that way.
So the Zen Thinking podcast is this soothing tones with interesting poetry and...
Yeah. And look, and the next line, do not reason with the unreasonable. Look, I've been a DJ for 30 years. The amount of people that have come up to the DJ box and asked for music that I'm never going to play, and they're drunk, and you cannot reason with the unreasonable, Brian, I'm on the same page with you. Look, I'd like to read something I wrote down earlier here.
Oh, you're into poetry too?
No. It's just something I wrote down earlier. Milk, bread, cigarettes. Oh, and cigarettes are crossed out. Now, that's ridiculous because I've never smoked. I forgot halfway through the list that I don't smoke. I've also made a list over here. I don't think this would make as good a podcast as Brian's. Yes. Here we go. Men Without Hats, Lamal, Berlin, Wawani, Real Life, Kim Wilde. There you go. There's a list of 80s artists that I'll be working with over the next month.
There's a message there for us all. I think you're going to be working with 80 artists.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, there's a tour.
80s artists.
Yes, there's a tour. There's a tour going around Australia called Totally 80s, and I'm going to be the MC on stage with that kind of thing. And that would be the opposite of a Zen night. What'll be happening? Let me tell you, there'll be no Zen going on whatsoever.
It would be. But I tell you what, folks, we'll link to that tour in the show notes.
And yes, thank you, Brian. That's Brian Thompson with the Zen Thinking Podcast. And he explains all that stuff in a way that you may or may not agree with him, but it's certainly worth a listening. And I want a Tibetan singing bowl. That little doing. Well, see, I haven't actually got a Tibetan singing bowl, but I do have a tap bell that I stole from at the front desk of a hotel in Las Vegas where I had a great night. So it's kind of spiritual in a different way. Listen to this. Okay, let's see now. I'll read some of the stuff I've written. Yeah. Bread, milk, not cigarettes.
That's profound.
Yeah, that was profound, yeah. And, it's easy to remember not to buy cigarettes because I've never smoked. So that's kind of good. And you feel good. So it doesn't matter if you buy something that's a little bit naughty at the supermarket. You know you haven't bought cigarettes, so you're going to feel better about that. Look, Aldi's got everything now.
Aldi's got everything.
And that's the Zen Thinking Podcast. And website as well. Have a look there, catch some of Brian's poetry. One of the other podcasts that I regularly listen to, which is not going to put you in a Zen mood usually. It's going to put you in a bit of a worried mood occasionally, perhaps a conspiratorial mood, although I do not like to use that word. I like to use anomaly. And there's a lot of anomalies in the Higher Side Chats, or as Greg Carlwood, the host, likes to call it, THC, which just happens to be the anyway. If you know what it is, you know. If you don't, you don't. The Higher Side Chats. It's a great show. I never miss an episode of it. He has a premium version so that people who pay can get a longer version of the show, and a lot of people avail themselves to that. He has a very interesting, like Brian Thompson I mentioned earlier, who has the Zen Thinking Podcast. He has a Patreon account like we do here for the Skeptic Zone, but Greg Carlwood's taken a different path with this, and I think it's a very interesting one. All the donations he gets every month, half of those donations he gives away at random to a listener who's a subscriber. So you could be a subscriber to him and suddenly you'll get half the money of all the donations he received that month. He calls it the money bomb. At first I was worried that it wasn't a sustainable model, and you think, well, if he didn't do that, he'd get double his money. But it's a way of directly giving something back to his listeners that subscribe, and also a lot of them often end up buying some of his T-shirts or his merchandise anyway.
It sounds like an interesting business model. I don't think it's one the Skeptic Zone will be following at the moment, but however.
Yeah. Look, he's the only one that does it. I think it's a unique idea. And he has the best introductions for most. There's two podcasts I know that have the most thorough introductions. Greg Carlwood on the Higher Side Chats is one of them. The other one is Gilbert Gottfried's incredibly colossal podcast. In fact, if you just listen to Gilbert Gottfried's incredible colossal podcast introduction of the person he's about to interview, you really probably don't need to listen to the interview because it usually goes for about a minute and lists everything they've done. Similarly, Greg Carlwood has well-written, structured, funny, informative introductions that I always really enjoy. Now, a lot of the skeptics listening will probably not be on board with, probably none of the topics that he covers, and maybe sometimes the evidence for some of the things that are discussed could be described as scant, but I love listening to this shit. Scant. Yeah. What's wrong with scant?
No, it's a good word. I think you're right. Some of the things he discusses, we're just looking at the website now, and one of the items is NASA lies.
Well, yeah. Yeah, look, and also he writes in his About section for the Higher Side Chats, he talks about podcasts in general and some of the ones that tend to deal with anomalies and the paranormal. And he says there's a lot of problems with a lot of the paranormal and conspiratorial podcasts because they suffer from poor audio quality, unnecessary fear-mongering / yelling. I'll go along with that. Oh. Alan Jones in particular, I think he's talking about there. Lengthy off-the-cuff introductions that stall the interview, which is correct. His may be sometimes lengthy, but they're certainly to the point and very educational. And the same 5 corporate ads in every episode. That's right. I mean, a lot of us are a little bit sick about hearing from Audible all the time. In fact, I'm surprised you haven't got on board with that.
It has crossed my mind, but at the moment we're not taking paid advertising. That might change in the future, but right now, no.
And also, the episodes are very, very well edited, and the sound quality is fantastic. So, look, I give 10 points. Like I said, a lot of skeptics won't go into it, but even Greg Carlwood does topics from time to time that his listeners that are very much into anomalies of all sorts don't want to have any truck with. And here's one from an episode where he interviewed Marty Leeds, and it was all about, well, look, I'll let Greg introduce this, and I've got to say, sure, This is out there, but this is why I listen to the Higher Side Chats.
That's true, Dr. Zayas. Where would we be without THC? 'Cause we know they're lying to us, just don't know to what degree. Yeah, where would we be without THC? The Higher Side Chat Show, Greg Carwood and Company.
All right, folks, we know deception runs deep, and we try to hold all our accepted truths up to the light and make sure they check out. But the most far-out idea, the most polarizing possibility that we've ever really tackled here has got to be the Flat Earth episode with Eric Dubay. Since that show, I've had many people write me to say that they've stopped listening after wasting their time with such a ridiculous concept. I've had Plus members cancel because that episode changed their life for the better, and it's become their sole topic of interest. And I've lost potential guests because they couldn't be associated with a show that would even discuss such a thing. So I figured, why not make more trouble for myself and do it again, because Marty Leeds, another previous THC guest, one of the few that I'd call a friend now, and a researcher I really respect, set off to disprove that ludicrous flat earth fallacy and found that he really couldn't. It's since become a bigger part of his paradigm, his spiritual journey, and the amazing stuff you can find on his website at martyleeds33.com, along with the 4 books he's written and his kick-ass music. Ladies and gentlemen, my go-to gematria guru, effervescent and always pleasant, Marty, my man, welcome back to the Higher Side.
Hey, thanks, man.
Yeah, pleasure to have you. It's awesome.
Always love the intros, dude.
I love it. See, to the point in there, and I just love the fact that he'll tackle any topic and he'll do it with aplomb.
We have not, I don't think, covered the flat earth on the Skeptic Zone, Maynard.
Well, it's kind of hard because if you got anyone on that was into it, you would immediately, well, you'd have a worse problem that Greg Carwood had there. I mean, there'd be people really complaining on your show.
There would be, although from time to time, especially some of the interviews you do, we do interview people who are of the completely other opinion in science and reason, but it's done in such an interesting way because we tease out what they're really thinking.
Have you even had any people on that even bring up the hollow earth theory?
Yeah, only you.
Oh, that's me. Yeah, and I also bring up the hologram theory as well, yes, which no one's on board with. And I know we have people that understand theoretical physics where some of the calculations might hint at what we actually live in is a three-dimensional projection from a two-dimensional object. But I'm yet to meet those people because everyone just goes and walk away.
Do they?
Yeah, they do. That is what happens whenever I'm at a skeptic meeting and I try and get someone to talk about this. And look, I also got someone to try and explain Planck time to me, and either people go, "No, I haven't got time to. I haven't got
the time.
I haven't got Planck time for you," or they have. And I don't understand it. In fact, I've probably got a better chance of understanding Brian Thompson's non-duality than I have of what Planck time is.
So this is how you spend your time, Maynard, when you're not doing Maynard things. You're listening to these sort of podcasts, eh?
That and pulling my rubber chicken.
Oh, hello, what?
What, you think I've just got a rubber chicken on a wall for nothing? It makes a sound. Well, so that's a few of the things I listen to. So that's the Higher Side Chats and the Zen Thinking Podcast. Just 2 of the things that make up the mind of Maynard.
How much truth is there to claims of risk caused by the treatment of beef cattle with antibiotics? I'm Tamara Robertson, and you're hooked up to the feeding tube.
The Feeding Tube is the web video series that brings you the real facts behind popular food myths. Food woo is the most pervasive pop pseudoscience out there right now, and it desperately needs debunking. Each 3-minute episode is suitable for general audience and is produced by scientists for everyone. The Feeding Tube. Check it out. feedingtube.tv.
Oh, well, it looks like it's the end of the show. Yeah, come on, look. Oh, come on, look. All good things come to an end, and so does the Skeptic Zone.
So does the Skeptic Zone, that's right. Well, The crowd don't like it. We're coming down. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Skeptic Zone this week. Maynard, thank you for hosting me, indeed, in your wonderful Maynard studios in the Shatner room.
Yeah, it's been great having you in the Shatner room. After you go, I'm going to lapse into the Hefner room, and then I'll be out on the footpath shortly after that.
Oh dear. Coming up on the Skeptic Zone in the coming weeks. Actually, I'm not very sure, Maynard. You know what it's like on the Skeptic Zone. We're never quite sure week to week what we're going to have coming up next.
Look, it's a hand-to-mouth existence, which means you keep eating your fingers a lot. So if any of you could possibly see a way to go to Patreon and support the Skeptic Zone, that would be great. Richard needs your money. Think of those kittens, people. Think of those kittens. They need cardboard boxes to play in, and they don't come cheap because you have to at least pretend you're buying something at the supermarket when you go there to get them.
Yeah, I use a lot of money pretending to buy things so I can get cardboard boxes for the kittens. No, folks, your contributions via Patreon or PayPal at skepticzone.tv simply mean the show keeps going. That's the bottom line. The bottom line, Maynard, is the bottom line.
Yeah. Because Richard's got stuff to save up for. Of course, there's a possible trip he might have to take to Melbourne for the Skeptics Conference at the end of the year. And where do you think that money comes from? Sure, he can rob people in dark alleys, but that...
I tried it. It didn't work.
Yeah, but you only do that once or twice a year. Then you have people like Batman chasing you. Yeah. You don't want that going on there. But look, I'll let Richard sign off here because I'm going to go look down the back of the couch and see what I can give to the Skeptic Zone on Patreon right now. It might not be money.
I don't want to know what's down the back of your couch. But for this week, this is Maynard and Richard Saunders signing off from the Maynard International Studios William Shatner Room. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for contacts, an archive of all episodes since 2008, and our online store. Please support the Skeptic Zone by following us on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, liking us on Facebook, and leaving a review on iTunes. You can also show your support by subscribing via PayPal for as little as 99 cents a week. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics Inc. or any other skeptical organisation.